Hello and welcome to Vibrant Lives podcast. This is a podcast dedicated to your health and well-being, featuring interviews with experts in relation to nutrition, physical health, mental health, and my 5-minute food facts series, which are short episodes where I discuss nutrition-related topics. I'm Amanda Hayes, your host. I'm a lawyer turned nutritionist, and I'm on a quest to learn as much as I possibly can about living a healthy, active and fulfilling life, which I would call a vibrant life, and sharing what I learn with you here on this podcast. The health and nutrition space can be a confusing one, where information and misinformation mingle, and untangling fact from fiction and identifying reliable, trustworthy sources of information is not always straightforward. My aim is to help you do that by speaking with knowledgeable guests who can explain their area of expertise in an accessible way and provide you with practical tips that you can use to improve your own well-being. Before I introduce today's guest, I'll quickly acknowledge that any information or advice provided in Vibrant Lives podcast is not intended to be used to treat or prevent any medical conditions, and it's never a substitute for advice from your own health professionals. Today, I'll admit I am a little bit starstruck because I am here with Sara Gross. Sara is an Ironman champion, and during her years of professional competition, she had numerous podium finishes. Notably, in 2014, she won Ironman Brazil in a cracking time of 8 hours 56 minutes. For anyone who knows anything about Ironman, or even if you don't, I'll tell you that cracking the 9-hour mark is a really extraordinary feat. Sara also studied a PhD in women's history, and these days, combining her two passions, professional sport and women's roles within that space, she is the founder and CEO of Feisty. Feisty is a women-led media network dedicated to storytelling, critical thinking and community. Feisty has a stable of women-focused podcasts, including Hit Play Not Pause, which is one dedicated to menopause, and I really love it. It's so interesting. They also have Iron Women by Feisty, Mental Endurance with Vanessa Faye Forster, and most recently, Feisty Women's Performance Podcast, which is hosted by Sara herself. So today, Sara is on the other side of the microphone, so to speak. Feisty also hosts events like the upcoming Women's Performance Summit, and we'll talk a bit about that during the podcast, and you can find out how you can sign up for that fantastic sounding event with some great speakers like Dr. Stacy Sims. Stacy Sims is a collaborator of Saras, and she does amazing work studying and understanding women's physiology and how that plays into sports performance. It is an area that is understudied, no surprise there, and from a personal point of view, I have found her work extremely valuable. Anyway, that's enough from me. Time to meet Sara Gross. So today I am here with Sara Gross, who is an Ironman champion and the founder and CEO of Feisty Media. Hi, Sara.
Hi, Amanda.
Thank you so much for coming on Vibrant Lives podcast today. And Sara, I thought it would be nice to start with some quick-fire questions to get to know a little bit about you outside your role as Iron Woman champion, advocate for women in sport, and CEO of Feisty Media and podcast host. You do a lot of things. So, Sara, where did you grow up?
Okay, I grew up in a mid-sized town in Ontario, Canada, until I was 14, and then my family moved to the Middle East. So I lived in also a mid-sized town, kind of inland from Dubai in United Arab Emirates, and my family stayed there for 20 years.
Right. Oh, that's interesting. So does that mean that you were sent off to go to university away from there?
Yeah, I actually, prior to that, I went to a boarding school in Scotland for my last year in high school, which was super fun and a good escape from my family. And then I went back to Canada for university.
Wow, that's interesting. You've lived in some very diverse places, haven't you?
Yeah, definitely. It was, at the beginning, because I was a teenager moving to the Middle East, which is like a kind of a strange and unique experience. And it was really difficult to adjust culturally. But I'm really, really glad that I had that experience now, because it took me out of the security and safety that I had growing up in like a middle-class Canadian environment. And I had to learn really quickly, like, okay, the world is quite different at different places. And it really opened my eyes and changed who I am, you know?
I agree. We lived in Hong Kong for 10 years and my children had that same experience too. I think it's just it broadens your horizons, I think.
Yeah.
And anyway, back to our quick fire questions.
So Sarah, we're not being very quick on the quick fire. Sorry.
Your go-to meal for dinner.
Oh, I don't know if you want athlete Sarah to answer or now Sarah, because now Sarah's like burgers and pizza kind of girl.
And what was athlete Sarah?
Athlete Sarah would be more like steak and sweet potatoes and salad or stir fry. I still love those meals also, but there's a bit more burgers and salad kind of mixed in.
Yeah, a bit more leniency, I guess.
Totally.
Are you reading anything at the moment?
Yeah, I'm reading Invisible Woman by Caroline Corrado Perez, I think is how you pronounce her name. It's a wonderful book about how it's basically like a feminist lens on technology and how we like have excluded studies on women from a lot of product development. And it's really interesting, like how even like crash test dummies for our vehicles are done on like the average size. The crash test dummy is the size of the average size man. And so more women actually end up with injuries in automobile crashes. Like it's these crazy things that you think, oh my gosh, like our society actually is kind of designed for men in a way.
Yeah, that is so interesting. I mean, we will get to that in terms of sports science, but it's much more pervasive than that. Obviously, just everything. We've got a lot of work to do.
We do. Women. Yep. That's what we're here for. Right.
And are you enjoying listening to anything at the moment? Music, podcast, audio book?
I have a lot of like girl power rap on my run playlist. But I do listen to podcasts. I love this is don't tell anyone. I'm saying it on a podcast, but I love Gary Vee, what he's doing right now. He's definitely like focused in on using empathy as a tool for business building and marketing. And it's his content is incredible, and and he comes out with a podcast every day, so it's great.
Oh, goodness.
Or the Knowledge Project is another one that I really like. Kind of a deep dive into different ways of thinking about the world.
Oh,
it scratches my intellectual academic kind of itch that I get every once in a while.
Great. Oh, I'll look into those. They sound really good. And do you ever relax? And do you have a favorite way to relax?
I do relax. Actually, now exercising has become part of my relaxation, like as a former pro athlete. So I do trail running. And so that's part of it. Or I walk, I'll sometimes just go for a walk with my partner or on a call or listen to a podcast. And then like simple stuff like Netflix or hanging out with friends. Yeah.
And do you have a dream holiday destination?
I'm going to go with Hawaii on that one. Probably a boring answer, but I love it. We had the Ironman World Championship there every year. So I've sort of been there. Pandemic aside, I've been to Hawaii probably every year for 15 years. So.
Oh, wow. So you've been there both as an athlete and as a, in quotes, tourist?
Yes, athlete, tourist, and also as part of the media for the event.
Yeah. Oh, fantastic. Sarah, let's talk about your sporting background. So I'm curious about how you found your way into triathlon, because you are a bit younger than me, but when we were growing up, triathlon was a bit of a fringe kind of sport. It certainly didn't have the high profile then that it does have today. So what sports were you involved in growing up before you found triathlon?
Yeah. So part of my journey is the fact that we moved to the Middle East. So I was a soccer player in Canada, which is a big girl sport in Canada. And when we moved, there wasn't the same high level of sport for women just in the Middle East in general. We did have sports, but that's when I started to do more sport on my own. So I would swim laps just because I enjoyed it, or go running. I used to run like 5Ks with my dad, when I was 16 years old. And so that's when my love of those individual sports came in. And then when I went to university, I was on the swim team. And I remember there was a girl who was going to the world championship for triathlon. And I just thought this was the coolest thing I'd ever heard. Like, imagine being good at 3 sports, right? And then I volunteered for my last year of university. I volunteered for the local triathlon. So that was kind of like the first time triathlon came into my view. I was actually at university and I volunteered. And I remember seeing, again, it wasn't that popular a sport, and there really weren't that many women doing it. And the few women that I saw coming through the transition, like from swim to run, or from swim to bike, the first transition, I was like, wow, this is amazing. I really want to do this. And then I did my first triathlon the next year.
Fantastic. And what was that like, your first triathlon?
Well, because I had been swimming and running since I was 16, I had this massive gap on the bike.
Yeah.
And I didn't really enjoy cycling that much. So I had bought a bike, but I think the distance of the race was 30 Ks. And that just seemed like a really, really long way. Yeah. And so beforehand, I had gone out for a couple bike rides where I would do like 10K or 20K. I did 30K a couple times, but it was definitely a bit of a baptism of fire in terms of, coming out of the water in a reasonably good position and then just being passed by hundreds of people on the bike, and then finding my legs again on the run. Like, I don't know if, maybe some of your listeners remember what it's like to run off the bike for the first time. Yeah. I had that experience during a race, where your legs are wobbly and
really hard, isn't it? To me, that's the hardest part of a triathlon, is that I know you practice and you improve at it, but it's still hard for me anyway, that bike to run.
Yeah, it's an adaptation for sure.
Yeah. So then you became, years down the track, you became a pro triathlete, and you competed in a huge number of races, and you actually won several Ironmans. So I think that's amazing, and congratulations. And it might be hard to answer this, but do you have some career highlights as a professional triathlete?
Yeah, I definitely do. There's, when I won my first Ironman, I was 38 years old. So it took me 10 years of racing pro to actually win. I had won a couple other championship races before at the long course distance, but I hadn't been able to be in the right place at the right time to win Ironman. It was like I came second and third, and I knew it was going to happen eventually. And then I won Ironman Brazil in 2014. And after the race, there was a video of me stuck behind a massive pack of South American men on the road, right? And in a very popular triathlon forum, they were talking about, they essentially talked about how I was like cheating and drafting, which I was like, honestly, I probably raced too clean. I used to like keep those drafting rules to and it really upset me because I had tried for so long to win. And so 3 months later, I went to Ironman Mont Tremblant, which is here in Canada. And it's a hilly course on the bike. There's, it was it was a course where like, drafting wasn't going to help you anyway, even if you wanted to do it. So I won that race and very cleanly. And that felt really, really good because I had sort of proved my doubters. It was also in Canada. So I love that winning on home territory thing too.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Well done, because it's sometimes, I think, facing up to that criticism must have been, quite crushing. You'd work so hard to win the race, and then people say that you're essentially drafting. So yeah, that would have been very, very hard to handle, I imagine.
Yeah. I felt like something was being taken away from me.
Yeah. Your win didn't perhaps feel as legitimate as it should have.
Right. And then the other factor that was playing into at the time was that people were like, oh, look, like she wasn't able to run as fast in another week. Like there was this, we're going to talk about female performance later, I know, but like there was this misunderstanding about how as women we tend to have different types of performance days as we go through our cycles. And I don't think like 2014, it's like 8 years ago, that information wasn't public, right? Like we didn't talk about it in the way that we do now. People didn't, even our coaches we didn't have that information. So that was the other thing too, is this like expectation of consistency. Like that if I ran really well at this one race, well, I must have cheated because I didn't run as well at a different race. So that logic just doesn't make any sense.
Of course not. And we will get into that. Just while we're still on triathlon, do you have a favorite distance to race, or did you have?
It depends when you ask me. I think I would probably say that I love shorter distance because I love fast and furious. But physiologically, I'm better at the longer distance, and definitely was better at running long off the bike, physically. So it's fun to be able to overtake people in the back half of the race. You know, that's fun. But if I was going to do one now just for pure joy, I would choose a short race.
Yeah, I mean, it's a massive commitment, training for a full.
Right, that too. Yeah.
And favorite race location?
Oh, I loved racing in Europe. Like I loved in Austria and Klagenfurt, and there's like beer gardens everywhere along the course. There's 100,000 people out there cheering you on. Or in Zurich, in Switzerland, same thing. Like I felt like I was racing in the Tour de France. You know, and when you're one of the first women coming through too, like you get those extra cheers from the crowd. So that I like lapped up. I loved it. The energy of that helps you get through an Ironman for sure.
Oh, for sure. I think with any race, if there's spectators there, it just gives you such a boost. And if you've got a race number with your name on it and people are calling out your name, it just, it's so wonderful, isn't it?
Mm-hmm. It's amazing. And I prefer when they put my first name on, when they're starting, when it says gross across my deck. It's not as good. And
what's your favorite tri leg?
Running. It has to be running. It was definitely the thing I was best at, but also it's last. So you're near the end, right? Yeah. And it's fun. Like I said, it's a better place to be overtaking people at the end than to be just hoping to hold on, you know?
Yeah. Oh, that's interesting. My favorite leg is swimming, because that's what I'm best at, but that gives you the least advantage, unfortunately.
I mean, swimming's a good one to be good at because it's like there's a confidence that comes with that. Yeah. Like at least you're not freaking out as you get in the water, or some things people go through. I know it's really hard for some people.
Yeah, especially if it's rough. There's been a few races I've done where it's been really rough, and that some people feel terrified by that, whereas I think, oh, that's fun. You know? Right. So I do want to come back to the issue of women's performance in triathlon and sport generally. But before we do that, I'd like to just ask you a few questions about your academic career, because that ties in with what you're doing these days. Sure. So you have an interest in women's experiences that go beyond sport. And at university, you completed a PhD in women's history. So what motivated you to study women's history?
Interesting. I was someone who had observed since I was very young that there was a discrepancy of opportunity for women and girls. And I definitely felt it was unfair. Like I was a little kid who was like, the boys can do it, I can do it, you know? And so I often talk about a time when I was with my dad at his office. He was the VP at like a local college. And I noticed that like the men all had offices around the exterior of the building where they had windows and big offices. And the women were working kind of in the middle, like they were the support staff. And that was like generally, like I know there was one woman in another VP position, but there's certainly like that gender divide was pretty clear to me. And I observed that I was maybe 7 or 8. And I thought there's something wrong here. Like, this is not how I feel in the world. Right. Yeah. Like I feel like I want to be the person in the perimeter office with the big windows. Right. Yeah. And so that kind of, that observation kind of like framed a lot of my interests and decisions too, especially when it came to my PhD. And then realizing that the way that we observe history and tell history is also through a male lens. So like if no one goes in and asks questions like, what were the women doing? Or how did women contribute to whatever period of history you're looking at? Then like someone has to do that work. Right. Yeah. So that was kind of why I chose that direction.
And what was your PhD topic on?
So I did work on the ancient world, so like for first and second century. So I compared and contrasted communities in the Mediterranean, a Jewish community, a Greek community, and a early Christian community to see what women did in each of those communities, and then like take that feminist lens of like who had the most relative freedoms by our sort of feminist framing of what freedoms look like. So yeah, it was pretty interesting. It's hard to find information about the ancient world.
What I was thinking when you were saying that, it must be quite hard because, as you say, women, everything was done through a male lens, so there probably wasn't a lot of documentation about women's roles.
Even a lot of the written work from back then, like you didn't have that many women who were educated enough to actually write and to tell the story. So you're often dealing with things like looking at the kinds of bowls that people would use to cook, or the way houses were arranged archaeologically, or like epitaphs, tombstones, what they say on them. You know, you had some interesting things, like you'd have like a woman's name and then head of the synagogue, right? And then you can go and look for that name elsewhere in the literature and see if you could find out something about her, for example.
So it's a detective work as well.
Detective, definitely. Yeah. That's a great word. Yeah, it's definitely detective work.
Wow, that's interesting. Which society did you find had the most freedoms in terms of the way we would view women's freedoms now?
Yeah, actually, surprisingly, my conclusion was that the women who came from the traditional Jewish communities had more freedoms. And I don't know whether, I suspect that that's partially because of like kind of what the Jews went through at that time in history. And they were actually being persecuted by the Romans, the Greeks and the Romans, like under the Roman, well, what became the Roman Empire at the time, the Greek Empire. So sometimes in persecuted communities, it's like an all hands on deck situation in terms of the roles that people play in their own environment. So yeah, I found like it's sort of hard to make those judgments, but I think if you ask the right questions, you get sort of a different set of answers. And so like one thing, like what I mean by that is that like, for example, like before there were any women who did history, who looked at history, we had archaeological digs of Jewish synagogues, right? And then the historians decided, oh, this is the women's area, right? Well, which would be like a small area off to the side. Right? And then like somebody has to come along and go, well, why? Like, why did we assume that that's a women's area? Yeah. Do we know that men and women didn't mix at the time? Do we know, like, how do we know that, right? And when you start asking different questions, you get different answers. Basically.
Yeah, that's really interesting and important work, because a lot of those initial assumptions must have been made through the lens of, you know, the way we see the world now and the way we assume that history was, that women had a lesser role.
Mm-hmm. And I think we make that false assumption that like women's freedoms are just gradually getting more and more. Like as if it's like an even thing that's improving consistently across time. And that's just not the case. Everything cycles, right? So there were times when women would have had a bigger role in certain societies, and then other times when we were more oppressed, and it goes like that.
Yeah, and different societies are different too. I mean, there are some matriarchal societies out there. So, you know, it's not one, as you say, one consistent like line of increased freedoms.
Right, exactly.
So let's move on to women's performance in sport. And you've mentioned the first Ironman that you won in Brazil. A week before that, you were competing in Texas. And in that race, you came 18th. And you say that you kind of knew instinctively that your body wasn't, in Texas, it wasn't feeling quite right. And you knew that a week later in Brazil, you were feeling better. You actually say on your website, I love this, so I'm going to have to quote you here. I didn't know what the hell was going on with my body. My coaches didn't know. My doctors didn't know. Heck, sports science didn't even know. The little we did know was all bad news about how hormones get in the way of our performance. No one ever thought to ask, how can I mitigate the negative effects of my cycle through nutrition or training adaptations and actually perform? And that's pretty much what was happening for you at the time, wasn't it? When you raced in Brazil and won, it was timed with your cycle in such a way that you were at the peak of your performance.
Yeah.
So let's talk about how come we don't know enough about women's performance and how it ties in with our cycles. So one of the issues is that the scientific study of athletes has virtually ignored women. I think only 6% of exercise science studies have been done exclusively on women.
Yeah.
Why is this?
um, I think the easy answer to that is because it was long understood and accepted that that hormone cycles were going to interrupt, taking into account our hormone cycles, were going to interrupt the purpose of the study. Right. So women were considered kind of an anomaly. Like you actually see that word in the literature, even though we're 50% of the population, an anomaly for a sports science study. So it was like, okay, if we just study men, then we're going to find out what's really happening. And that was a kind of an accepted norm. Like I got rejected from a sports science study. And when I was living in Scotland, they did a call out for runners. And I think there was some kind of time they wanted like elite runners. And I was living at the National Training Center for a lot of sports. So there were a lot of elite runners there. And it was like we had to run a certain speed for 10K to be able to be part of the study. And some of my male counterparts, like on the Scottish national team for triathlon, have done studies before as a way to earn extra income. Right. So I was like, okay, I'll go, I'll be part of this study. And then I think, first of all, a couple of things happened. One, because they had put this not super fast, but relatively fast 10K time as the qualifying, they didn't expect any women to come forward. Right. And then I was rejected because they're like, well, sorry, like your hormone cycle might affect your performance in the study. And we don't want that to and I was doing a PhD in women's history and it didn't even occur to me. I was like, oh, that makes sense. Like at the time I had also been indoctrinated in the culture in a way that's like, oh, it wasn't until years later and I started, I read Roar by Dr. Stacy Sims and started to think, oh, right, of course. Like if we don't take hormone cycles into account, how do we know how women perform? Like, how do we know if any of the information that we even have in sport and exercise science applies to us? Like, we just don't know. So I also had an arc on that of realizing, oh, wait a second. This doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, I totally agree because as you mentioned, Dr. Stacy Sims, and one of her sort of catch cries, I suppose, is women are not small men. And I absolutely love that. So what she means by that is, what do people say? You pink it and shrink it. So you take a study that's done on men and you think, okay, women are just like men, but a little bit smaller. So we'll just, reduce the amounts or whatever and then apply it to women. But of course, that's not the way things work. There are a multitude, I think, of problems with treating women athletes like small men. Of course, not taking into account our unique physiology is one of them. So can you talk to us a bit about what comes up? What are the problems with women not being studied specifically in sport?
Wow. What isn't a problem? I mean, it's like if we haven't studied women, we don't really know. Like we actually don't, it's actually exciting in a way, because in a way it's like, okay, only 6% of studies, exercise science studies done exclusively on women. Okay. That's not a lot. Right. But also there's a long way to go and there's a lot to learn. And some of the studies that are coming out now, some like Stacy's work, and there's like a groundswell of people coming up behind Stacy, like of folks who are doing PhDs and really looking into the physiology and nutrition side of women's performance. So I think we're about to get this sort of cascade of information. And then just the way that science works, of course, it's going to shift and change over time. So like what we think we know now is going to continue to evolve, but at least we're like on the first rung. Like before there wasn't even a ladder. Right?
Yeah.
So that's where I think essentially, I think it affects, to answer your question, like, I think the fact that we don't have those studies actually affects everything.
Yeah.
Right. And actually means that like listening to our instincts and telling our stories becomes the first step of figuring out like where we need to go next and what we need to look into. And that's like back to the story of Texas versus Texas. Like those races were 8 days apart in Ironman Texas and Ironman Brazil. And I ran an hour faster 8 days later. Like that's not a fitness thing. No. That was just me being in my luteal phase and feeling flat. Right. And so when I, not just feeling flat, but like performing flat, like my hormones cannot do it. And so I think what I meant when I was like, are there certain, I think what we're going to learn moving forward is like, are there things that I can do to actually help me perform during that flat luteal phase? And I think we're going to find answers to that. We just don't know what they are right now.
Yeah, I agree. I think it's really exciting. And I mean, I'm in my 50s now, and I read Raw by Stacy Sims recently and then went on to do her Menopause for Athletes course, because for me, it was such a wake-up call. It was like a light bulb moment, explaining how some days I felt great and I feel like I could run forever, and other days I feel like I'd never run before in my life. You know, every step was hard work. On the basis of that, actually, I've changed up my training. I've added in some heavy, or two days a week of lifting heavy shit, as Stacey would put it, and added in some plyo work as well. And I have to say, I'm really finding it's benefiting me. I'm feeling a lot stronger. So I'm very grateful to Stacey and you for bringing that out into the world. You know, I'm someone who's, I mean, obviously not a professional like you were, but I live and breathe this stuff. I love it. And I didn't even know. I mean, it didn't even occur to me until recently that, of course, you know, training with your cycle, it makes total sense. But it just, the information just hasn't been available for us, I think. So as you said, we're kind of at the beginning we're on the first rung of the ladder, which is great because we're no longer going to be ignored by science. So do you feel hopeful about the future in that sense?
I do. I definitely feel hopeful. The other factor there is to do with like who funds the research and like where that money comes from and how they make decisions about what research gets done. So I think like what we're seeing too in business and finance is that women are controlling more of the money also, just broadly speaking. Yeah. So I think we'll see like those things change together where we'll be able to say, hey, look, women's, not just sports science, but like women's health in general, like it matters in terms of even the medical studies too. And we're seeing, for example, women's health is being heavily funded right now in terms of startups and VC funding, right? So those like products, that's everything from like studies, products, all of that stuff. It's about to hit.
Yay. About time, hey?
Exactly.
So let's talk about Feisty Media. You founded and you're the CEO of Feisty Media. You founded it in 2017, and that was based or driven by your own experience as a female athlete and a person obviously with an academic interest of women in society. And you saw that women had only a fraction of the opportunities that men do in professional sport, and also that girls drop out at twice the rate of boys. And you were thinking, okay, a cultural shift is needed. So you founded Feisty Media. So can you tell us a little bit about that? First of all, what's your vision for Feisty Media and what do you do there?
Yeah, it's a bit of you said my goal very well. Maybe I should hire you. Yeah. So our goal is to create an empowering culture for active women broadly, which is like kind of like, how do you do that? Right. So for us, like we do that in a variety of ways. One is through the podcast. We have 8 podcasts now. And that it's just essentially like talking to women about our experiences, bringing in experts to like Stacy Sims and whomever to actually break down like the science and what we can use, what's relevant to us as women. And then, so we have that, like the media side, social media. And then we also create educational products. So we do courses. We partner with Stacy on her brand. And we have events as well that are typically educational events. So we have our Women's Performance Summit, which is coming up March 25th to 27th. We also have a menopause summit, the Outspoken Women in Triathlon Summit that happened for a couple of years in Arizona until we went virtual the last couple of years. Yeah. But again, that's really just all about shifting that culture within triathlon. So it's about like how we become better female athletes, but also how we can grow our businesses in the triathlon endurance sport space, how we can become better coaches for women in terms of using the information that we know about physiology and applying it to training programs. So it's kind of a broad, kind of broad topic around with triathlon. So events, podcasts, social media, the online courses. We have this year, we're launching our new coaching product. So we're doing a beta around, for coaches around, in our 4 pillars. So our 4 pillars of performance are physiology, nutrition, mental health, and culture. So we're creating a small course that coaches could take to learn like not quite as in depth as like what Stacy does in her like deep dive into physiology, but more just like a basic level that any coach could learn how to work with female athletes better. So that's one thing we're doing.
Fantastic. I think that's really needed.
Yeah. And the coaches themselves are saying that's what they want, right? Like that's been something that we've done is like, because we're a media company, we like led with community, right? So we were like talking to people all the time, creating podcasts and like talking to the community first before we decided, like, we didn't even know what products we were going to create. Like we didn't even know what we were going to sell when we started the company, basically. And so that's kind of by accident actually been a good way to grow a business, because it's like we listen to the community and we say, hey, what do you need? Or we hear what people are talking about. Then we say, okay, great. Like, let's have a women's performance summit, because it feels like there's a need to like vet the experts, bring people in and learn about women's performance. So then we did that. Or with this coaching product, it's the same thing. Like the coaches are actually kind of going, we want to learn more. How do we learn more? Right. And we're like, okay, great. We'll find the people and we'll help you learn more.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. So tell me a bit about the annual Women's Performance Summit that's coming up. You said it's in March.
Yeah, it's the 25th to 27th of March, and it's virtual. So we started virtual. We had the first one last year, and it was virtual for obvious reasons. But our community asked for virtual again, so we're still online, and we essentially we have about 20 experts coming who will speak in our 4 pillars: in physiology, nutrition, mental health, and culture. We also have like some super exciting keynotes that we just announced. So we've got Amelia Boone, the world champion obstacle course racer. We have Alison Desir, who just launched her book about, I think, running while Black, or Black girls do run. It's something like that. Her movement. And then we have Lael Wilcox, who won outright Race Across America, the long bike race. Yeah. So we have some really fun keynotes. And also we chose our keynotes specifically, choosing people who have like stories, who have been open about their stories. So maybe they've struggled with an eating disorder, or like those culture physiology pieces have affected them personally, and they're willing to talk about it. So those are the types of things we're putting on the main stage. And then for we have panel discussions. So we're bringing together people who can like unpack, like we're going to unpack body image, I think, in a big way at this one. So yeah, I think, and last year was really fun. Like the weekend was just like the virtual platform we use. It's called Hopin. So it's not like a Zoom call, right? It's like you're interacting. There's expo booths. You can go and visit the speakers after their talk. It's just like, we try to make it as interactive as possible to keep people engaged and actually want to stare at a screen for 5 hours a day on the weekend.
I think that's great doing it virtually, because it means someone like me in Australia in a completely different time zone can participate. And also I think you offer a package where you can access the materials for up to a year or something. And that's perfect for someone like me, because some of the times are going to be in the middle of the night, obviously, and I won't be able to be awake. So I can then access it the next day or whenever. So that's a great innovation as well.
Yeah, we found that a lot of people like that too, or that people were going back and watching the summit sessions afterwards too. Like they attended the summit and they want to see it later too. So it's you can have it for a year if you buy the all access pass. Yeah.
Oh, that's great. I'll put a link to that obviously in the show notes. So you mentioned also that you have 8 podcasts, and I've listened to quite a few of them over the last few weeks, but you have your own, within that you have your own podcast called Feisty Women's Performance Podcast. And it's quite new. I think you've just done an introductory episode and then 3 more. So tell us about your goals for that podcast. What are you trying to, what message are you trying to get out?
Yeah. So the goals for that podcast are very similar to the goals for our summit. So I think what we saw was that there's a lot of BS out there that people trying to sell, like women's things are popular right now. Like it's a cool for a company to focus on, to make something pink, like you said before, shrink it and pink it, sell it to women, right? So we thought, let's try to vet some of the so-called experts and try to get some quality information so people can know that they're getting real information that's going to help them to thrive and to perform. And so in whatever sport, right? And also the other really important thing I think for us is that we take a multidisciplinary approach. So I know that, like, for example, my Instagram feed right now is full of talk about how to train with your menstrual cycle, right? Which is really important. And we talked about that earlier, but that's not the only thing, right? Like how we see our bodies affects how we eat. It affects our mental health and even just our state of mind affects our training. Like all of these things work together. So we wanted to create an environment where we can talk about those things all together instead of like isolating them into individual factors. So that is something that I'm doing through the podcast, and that we're also doing at the summit.
Yeah. And you mentioned earlier that you have 4 pillars: the physical, nutrition, mental health, and culture. And I absolutely love culture being one of your pillars, because that's probably something that isn't really looked at, but we're all performing under the umbrella of the culture that we live in. So it's so important, isn't it, to understand how women fit in and, where we're going, where we've come from. So I love that about what you're doing. In fact, the latest podcast I listened to with Christy Moan, you talked about just that, about culture and how she's an advocate for not just women but non-binary cyclists, and she's creating this really inclusive culture. So that was a great episode. So thank you for that one.
Yeah, I loved my conversation with Christy too. It's funny, and thank you for saying that about the culture piece, because when we ask people what they want, like we sort of in some of our groups went in and said, here's the 4 pillars. What do you want to hear more of? And everyone always says physiology and nutrition, right? But in practical terms, when you bring up a conversation like about body image, for example, which for me would fit under the culture pillar, everybody wants to talk about that. It's like it's like, oh, we're finally naming something that, like, we've got these internalized notions around body image or around diet culture. Like, people in reality, we do want to, I think, talk about it in that multi-layered way. Like, it's hard to create a nutrition program, right, for yourself as an athlete without unpacking all the things, all the hangups that we have about food, right? So I think those things definitely go together.
Yeah, absolutely they do. The second episode you had Taylor, I'm not sure if I'll pronounce this properly, Tracy, who talked about, she was a volleyballer, and she talked about diet culture and what an impact that had on her own, well, not just her own performance, but her whole life, actually. I found that an absolutely fascinating episode. And it made me think, gosh, there's probably so many women who are facing issues like this, but it's not talked about so much. So I really loved that episode. She was a terrific speaker. So thank you again for that one.
Yeah, Taylor was great. And I think a lot of people have this perception that elite athletes are kind of born with this natural physique, right? But the reality is that there's more eating disorders amongst female athletes than the regular population, where that's because of that internalized expectation around what your body's going to look like as an elite athlete. And it's really problematic. Like, we need to learn to fuel our bodies properly, and perform at whatever weight our bodies want to be at.
Yeah, it's such an important message to get out there for us as women, to fuel our training properly and just feel good about, who we are and whatever weight we happen to be.
Exactly.
So I guess it's probably time to start wrapping up our conversation. So Sarah, do you still, I think you've actually answered this, but I'm going to ask you anyway, do you still race triathlons?
No, I don't. I'm not against it. I could see myself doing a triathlon. I have kept 2 bikes. So I still have a road bike and a gravel bike that I can go out for a ride if someone invites me, if it's a social time. So I could see myself doing one, but I do CrossFit. For that fun community thing, and also to be able to fit in my exercise into a short period of time. So I like to go go hard and leave. And part of my reason for that too is what you said earlier. Like I'm a little bit into perimenopause now. And just knowing that like lifting heavy shit as well as doing that plyometric training and stuff, that's all helping me. And you just get that automatically if you go to CrossFit. So that's just me kind of checking that box. And I love it. So
yeah, it's a very efficient way, as you say, of training, like you there for an hour or whatever it is, and you just get it all done. My sisters, I call it a cult, in the CrossFit cult.
Yeah, you're not totally wrong there. Yeah.
She's had, I think in Australia anyway, once you've done 1,000 sessions, you get a workout named after you. So she's had one named after her. She's really into it.
That's amazing.
Yeah,
what's her workout? Do you know what it is?
I'll ask her and I'll put it in the show notes.
Okay.
Interestingly, we're both going to do a half Ironman together later in the year. So her training's going to have to change up a little bit, I think, because of that. But she's starting from a really strong base.
Yeah, for sure. I think that strength that you have in that, and also like there's a lot of lactic threshold type training that's baked into CrossFit. So it's just about doing the long stuff, I think.
Yeah, exactly. Sarah, who inspires you?
Oh, I saw that question when you sent the questions through. I always struggle with this one because the truth is, like, to some extent, everybody inspires me, right? Like, I definitely, I especially like growing my business, but I look at people and I think, like, I like to see the best in people. Well, I do kind of automatically, and so I find myself inspired by anyone that's better at me at something, right? Whether that's parenting or something simple like the way that people are with other people, their people skills, just little things I observe. I try to like take in little things rather than have anyone on a pedestal, you know. All the people that work with me are brilliant in their own way too. I really love what Celine does with the Hit Play Not Pause podcast. Or Catherine, who works with us, who's like, she's just like transforming our organization and getting all the communications, working through the teams. And so, I'm inspired by everyday people all the time.
Yeah. Oh, that's a great answer. I love that. So you observe and you think that person's doing a certain thing really well, and you notice and perhaps learn from it. I love that. Mm-hmm. My final question, Sarah, that I like to ask all of my guests is, if you could recommend 2 things, they could be anything at all, that people could do to improve their well-being, what would they be?
Okay. So my first one is to listen to your instincts. This one's specifically for women too, because of everything we just talked about, because of the lack of, like, even the experts who think they know something about women's health or about training, really there's so far to go that, like, our instincts are probably the most important tool that we have. So there's that. And then I think my second thing would be just to apply empathy to all situations in our life. So, like, as if we can look at other people, like, even we started having trolls on Feisty, because I'm very proud we're now big enough to have trolls. but like, to think about if someone's trolling your content and they come onto your Instagram to say something negative about you, like, think of how bad that person's life must be. Right. Like, I can have a ton of empathy for that, because I'm like, really, this is how you're choosing to spend your time. Like, they must be, how they're expressing their frustrations to you is only just a fraction of, like, how they feel about themselves. Right. So I think if we, like, all went through life like that, just understanding that, like, real life and online trolls are just that, or anyone who's angry at us unnecessarily, then I think we can, I think we ourselves can be happier too, right? Because then people's little behaviors don't necessarily get us down.
And I think too, I mean, I'm not big enough to have trolls yet, but it's also being able to take a more objective view about it and not take it personally, because these people don't actually know you.
Right.
And that must be difficult to do. But if you look at it through a lens of empathy, like you said, you can flip it and see it for what it is.
Yeah, it's not about you, it's about them.
Yeah, exactly. Can you let us know, Sarah, the best places for people who want to follow you and see what you're doing at Feisty Media, and also where to sign up for your Women's Performance Summit?
Okay. So for the Women's Performance Summit, just go to womensperformance.com. Super easy. I can't believe that URL was available.
Wow.
Side note, that URL was like $500. Men's Performance was also available, and it was like 10 times or 20 times the price.
So it just says it all there, doesn't it?
Tells you something. So womensperformance.com, and then at feisty_media. That's us on Instagram. And for me, I'm Sara.Gross on Instagram.
I will put links to all of that in the show notes. So, Sara, thank you so much for coming on Vibrant Lives podcast today. I've absolutely loved talking to you and learning a bit more about women's performance and what we need, where we need to go, what we do know, what we need to learn, and also your personal journey. So thank you so much for sharing with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Amanda. I appreciate it.
That was Sara Gross sharing with us about the important work she does advocating for and empowering women in sport. It seems to me that there is an enormous and growing appetite for information specific to women to enable us to train and perform in sync with our physiology and with our hormones. But this goes beyond sport. It's relevant to all women. It's time that science took an interest in us. It's time for us to understand how our cycles impact us physically and mentally. It's time for us to embrace and respect our bodies and all that they allow us to do. And Feisty Media is forging that path for us, so hooray to that. I'm really excited about this year, 2022. I've got some informative interviews lined up for you, including with Stephanie Noon, where we'll be talking about positive psychology and happiness. So keep an ear out for that one. Thank you so much for listening today. I do hope that you enjoyed today's episode with Sara Gross. If you did, please share the podcast and tell your friends about it. Word of mouth is still the best way to grow the audience of my podcast. So I'm always grateful when you tell your friends about Vibrant Lives podcast. If you could take a minute to leave a rating on Apple Podcasts, it will help people find my podcast, and that's great for me too. Please follow me on Instagram at vibrant_lives_podcast or on Facebook at Vibrant Lives Podcast, and check out my website at www.vibrantlivespodcast.com. There you'll find a library of all my podcast episodes, reviews of books that I recommend that have something to do with health or well-being, and more. So please DM me or send me an email via the contacts page on my website and let me know what you'd like to hear more of, or if there's someone you'd like me to interview, or if you just want to say hi. Thanks for tuning in. Eat well, move well, think well.